I came home from burying my wife, and my son-in-law was already at my doorstep, shouting about his share of my $1.8 million company. His arrogance cut deeper than the funeral bells still ringing in my ears. But then I found my wife's sealed envelope. Inside, a secret so devastating it turned betrayal into my greatest weapon. What happened next, you simply won't believe. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room, the weight of betrayal pressing down heavier than the old oak beams above my head. My son and his wife thought they could trick me, thought they could take what I had spent my entire life building. And maybe, for a moment, they almost convinced me. But when I let my mind wander back through the years, I could not escape the memories of every sacrifice, every dollar, every moment of joy I had given up so that they could have more than I ever did. I still remember writing those tuition checks, $30,000 at a time, year after year, until nearly $60,000 was gone, just so my son could attend the private college he insisted would shape his future. I remember emptying the savings account Martha and I had kept aside for a small shop of our own. Her dream, to instead buy him a $25,000 car after graduation, because he said he needed something respectable for his new job. And I can't forget the wedding, the grand ceremony in Chicago that cost us close to $80,000 by the time it was over, the kind of wedding Martha and I never had. We ate canned beans for months to cover the debt. Now, as I thought about the coldness in their eyes when they demanded the deed to this house, I realized all those sacrifices had been treated as stepping stones for their greed. Not gifts of love, not tokens of trust, but fuel for their ambition to push me aside. It wasn't just money, though. It never was. Money can be earned again. But the hours, the years, the small daily things I let go of, they can't be replaced. Martha and I used to dream about traveling once the children were grown. She always wanted to see Paris. I told her, one day when the kids are settled, we'll go. But one day never came. Instead, I worked late shifts, skipped vacations, and canceled dinners with old friends because there was always another bill, another expense for the kids. We lived on rice and beans when the mortgage nearly crushed us, pretending it was enough. We patched old clothes instead of buying new ones, telling ourselves the children deserved better. I can still hear Martha's voice in the kitchen, humming as she served me lentil soup for the third night in a row. Both of us laughing, both of us believing it was temporary. We gave away parts of ourselves that can't be measured in dollars, our youth, our dreams, our energy. All for the promise that our children would be grateful, that they would carry our sacrifices as a legacy of love. But here I sat, realizing they saw none of it. To them, it was just entitlement, something owed. That thought hurt more than any bill ever could. This house is more than brick and mortar. Its walls hold the echoes of laughter from birthday parties, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, the sound of Martha's sewing machine humming late into the night while I read the paper by the fire. Every corner whispers of the life we built together. It is worth $2 million on the market, but no price could measure its true value. To me, it is a living memory. And now, to my son and his wife, it is only an asset to be sold. I saw the way Jessica's eyes gleamed as she looked around the living room last week, as if she were already arranging furniture in her mind. She touched the framed wedding picture of Martha and me like it was hers to keep. That picture once made me smile. Today it stabbed me. The smile Martha wore that day was no longer a reminder of our joy, but of what I stood to lose, not just property, but dignity, family, love. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall felt cruel, a reminder that time was passing and my own flesh and blood wanted me out before my time was naturally up. The silence in this house, once peaceful, now echoed with betrayal. When I began sorting Martha's things, hoping to find comfort, I stumbled onto something that shook me to the core. It was a small wooden box, tucked deep in the bottom drawer of her dresser. My hands trembled as I lifted it, the wood worn smooth from her touch. Inside lay an envelope with my name on it. I opened it, and my breath caught. It was a life insurance policy, $1.5 million. I expected to see my name, maybe Matthew's, maybe even both of our children. But instead, the beneficiary line burned into my eyes. Jessica Collins, my daughter-in-law, the same woman who now plots to push me into a nursing home and sell the house. For a moment, the room spun. I clutched the paper as though it might dissolve in my hands. Had Martha known? Had she chosen this, or had Jessica manipulated her in some moment of weakness? My heart ached with the weight of 2 betrayals, one from the living, one possibly from the dead. It was as if Martha's silence from beyond the grave had turned into a secret that cut me deeper than any argument could. My throat closed, and I whispered to her photo on the nightstand. "Why, Martha? Why would you let this happen?" The truth, whether deliberate or accidental, was clear. This document was a weapon, and I was now holding it. Shock gave way to something else. Anger first, hot and blinding, then a cold determination. I realized this was no accident. Whether Martha signed it with full awareness or Jessica tricked her into it, the result was the same. My family's legacy was in jeopardy. And yet, in this twisted discovery, I found clarity. This wasn't just about defending my rights or my comfort. This was about protecting Martha's memory from being tarnished by greed. I pressed the policy against my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered, "I will fight for you, for us, for Daniel, for everything we built." In that moment, I stopped being the grieving widower who let betrayal crush him. I became the guardian of something greater than myself. Every tear I had shed hardened into resolve. Every crack in my heart became iron. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. But I wasn't. Not yet. I went back to the living room and stared at my phone. Dozens of messages blinked across the screen, most from my daughter, some from my son-in-law. Pleas for understanding, demands for signatures, threats disguised as concern. I scrolled through them slowly, my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. Then I did something I had never dared to do before. I deleted them, all of them. I turned the phone off and set it face down. It was a simple action, but it was symbolic. For the first time, I was not reacting to them. I was taking control. I sat in the dark, the glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls, and told myself out loud, "No more. I am not the victim here. Not anymore." I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since Martha's death, I felt a spark of strength. The room around me was heavy with memories. The recliner where Martha used to read sat empty across from me, its cushion still bearing the faint indent of her frame. The mantel above the fireplace, lined with family photos, now seemed like a gallery of ghosts. Every object was a reminder of both love and betrayal. Even the tick of the grandfather clock felt different, no longer gentle, but like a countdown to confrontation. I sat in silence, letting the weight of it settle, until finally I leaned forward, clasped my hands, and whispered into the still air, "Martha, you left me this secret, and I will use it. It will save us, and it will bring them down." The words lingered, carried on the silence of the house, and I knew then Chapter 1 of my grief had ended. Chapter 2, The Fight, was about to begin. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke up the next morning with a different feeling in my chest. For weeks, grief and betrayal had been sitting there like a heavy stone, choking me, making every breath feel like it wasn't worth the effort. But now there was something sharper, a spark. The discovery in Martha's wooden box had changed everything. It was no longer just about surviving my loss. It was about protecting her memory, about protecting the life we built together, and about making sure our children understood that betrayal carried consequences. They thought I was weak. They thought I would crumble, but they had no idea what I had in my hands. I called Harris first. I have been a lawyer for 20 years. His voice came through the receiver, calm and steady, like it always had been. He asked me how I was holding up, and for the first time, I didn't break down. My voice was even, my words clear. I told him what I found, the policy with Jessica's name on it, the messages I had been receiving, and the way they tried to corner me right after Martha's funeral. Harris didn't sound surprised, but he was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again. "Richard, it's time we took control. Meet me this afternoon at my office. Bring everything you've got." My hand didn't shake as I held the phone. My shoulders didn't slump. I sat straighter, like a man who had been asleep and was finally awake. When I walked into Harris's office, the smell of polished wood and coffee greeted me. The place was familiar, yet today it felt different. It felt like a battlefield, and I was finally stepping onto it as a soldier, not as a victim. Harris laid out a stack of papers and explained every detail. We froze the joint account. We locked down the savings. He called the bank in front of me, his voice crisp, mind steady as I confirmed my authorization. I signed documents with a pen that no longer slipped in my grasp. I watched my name appear on page after page, a name that had been forgotten in their schemes, but now stood like a wall they couldn't climb. By the time I set the pen down, I felt it. The shift. The man who once shook with grief now pressed his signature into paper like he was carving it into stone. Later that day, I walked into the bank myself. The marble floors reflected the light overhead, and the sound of my shoes echoed as I approached the counter. A young banker, who couldn't have been older than 30, greeted me with a smile. When I handed him my ID and the request to confirm the freeze, his face changed. He looked at the screen, frowned, and then met my eyes with something almost like pity. "Mr. Miller," he said quietly, "there was an attempt to withdraw $250,000 from this account 2 days ago. The request was flagged and stopped because of irregularities. The name on the form was Jessica Collins." He paused, shook his head, and added softly, "I'm sorry, sir. It must hurt, seeing something like this come from family." That single sentence hit me harder than I expected. Hurt, yes, it did. But in that moment, I also felt the cruel contrast. This stranger, this young man who had known me for 5 minutes, showed me more kindness than my own flesh and blood. The people I raised, the people I sacrificed everything for, looked at me like a bank account to be drained. And yet here was a stranger asking if I was all right. My chest tightened, but not from grief this time, from resolve. I nodded at him, took the confirmation slip, and left the bank with my head higher than it had been in weeks. That evening they came, my son and Jessica. They showed up at my door with smiles stretched too wide, carrying binders and folders like salesmen ready to pitch their next deal. I let them in. I sat in my chair by the fireplace, the same chair I had occupied while reading bedtime stories to my children decades ago. Now it was my throne of silence. They spread out their papers on the coffee table, charts and numbers and promises of investments that would triple our fortune. Jessica spoke the most, her hands moving quickly as she pointed to one graph after another. My son sat beside her, nodding, eyes flicking toward me like he was checking to see if I was convinced. I didn't speak. Not once. I let the silence stretch, heavy and uncomfortable. I watched them squirm, watched Jessica talk faster, her voice rising, her explanations becoming desperate. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought I was struggling to understand. But inside, I was studying every word, every gesture, every slip of the tongue. I saw the greed behind their eyes. I saw the cracks in their story, and I felt no pity. At one point, Jessica pulled out an old letter, one Martha had written years ago, telling us both how proud she was of our children and how she wanted them to be secure. Jessica waved it like a flag, her voice trembling with false sincerity. "See, Richard, this was Martha's wish. She wanted us to be taken care of. You don't want to betray her memory, do you?" I stared at the letter for a long moment. My hands didn't tremble. My lips didn't quiver. Finally, I lifted my gaze and said quietly, "Funny how you have to dig into the past to justify what you're doing in the present. Martha wanted us all to be safe, not stolen from." Her face flushed red, her jaw clenched. My son shifted uncomfortably. In that moment, I knew they were desperate. They needed me to cave, and I wasn't going to. The next morning, I was back at Harris's office. He had been digging, going through public records, tracing connections. He handed me a thin folder, his expression grim. Inside was a copy of a debt collection notice. Jessica's name is at the top. The amount, $247,000. A web of unpaid loans, maxed out credit cards, and even a lien on a car I didn't know she had. I stared at the numbers, my mouth dry. Harris said softly, "She's drowning, Richard. That's why she's doing this. But that debt is her problem, not yours. And now it's our weapon." "Oh." I nodded slowly, the words sinking in like weights, anchoring me deeper into this fight. That was it. The crack in their armor. The secret that would destroy the illusion of their control. When I left Harris's office, the wind whipped around me, carrying the chill of early autumn. I pulled my coat tighter, but smiled anyway. For the first time since Martha's funeral, I smiled without bitterness. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I was too broken to resist. But I had the truth now. Their greed, their lies, their debts, it was all coming to the surface. And soon everyone would see it. As I walked back to my car, I whispered to myself, "They think I've lost, but the game has only just begun." And for those listening now, if you've ever felt that moment when betrayal lit a fire inside you, then you understand. If you believe the truth always finds a way out, I want you to comment on one word, just one. Comment on the word truth, because that is what I carry with me now. And that is what will bring them down. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment Tade2 below to let me know you're here with me. I set the dining room table the way Martha would have done it. Clean runner down the middle, the old crystal water glasses, the plain white plates that looked like they belonged in a magazine, even though we bought them on sale 30 years ago. I did not put out food. There would be no food today, only paper. Only truth. The late afternoon light slid across the hardwood like warm honey, catching the dust in the air, turning the room into something softer than the words about to be spoken. I stood for a while, listening to the grandfather clock in the hall, the tick and the tock, and the quiet little sigh the pendulum makes when it turns. I told myself to breathe with it. In, out, calm. This was my house. This was my table. This was my voice. The doorbell rang twice, fast like someone who believed they owned the place. I did not hurry. I opened the door and looked at my daughter and her husband, the way a man looks at a storm he knows he cannot stop, but can survive. They walked in like polished shoes, matching coats, matching smiles, binders under their arms, spreadsheets peeking out in color tabs. Jessica always liked color tabs. They moved toward the dining room and stopped when they saw the table. No food, only paper. The smile on my son's face twitched. Jessica didn't. She kept it there like paint. "Dad," my son said, putting a hand on the back of a chair like a salesman easing into his pitch. "We brought everything we talked about. The plan, it's all here. You'll see the numbers make perfect sense." I did not answer. I pointed to the chairs across from me. I sat at the head of the table, where I have always sat. The chair to my right, where Martha used to be, stayed empty. I did not look at it, but I felt it. A quiet lighthouse. A gentle warning. Jessica opened her binder and fanned out her pages. My son reached into a leather folder and slid a pen toward me like a gift. I folded my hands and waited. They started fast, eager, filling the air with words about opportunity, about unlocking equity, about how cruel the market could be if we failed to act. Jessica talked about moving me into a care environment, which is a soft phrase that tastes like iron when it hits the tongue. She talked about freeing cash. She talked about maximizing returns. She talked about my house like it was a chess piece she could move if she just said the right words in the right order. My son added numbers, a chorus to her melody. He kept glancing at my face to see if I understood. I understood everything. I waited until their rhythm felt like a pendulum. Then I reached for the first stack of papers beside my plate. I did not clear my throat. My voice was steady without it. I met with Harris, I said, and I laid down the bank confirmations the way a dealer lays down cards. The accounts are frozen. Every linked access has been removed. Any request to transfer funds requires my consent, in person, with 2 forms of ID. That process has already been tested. It works. The silence that followed was not long. It was heavy. Jessica blinked, then blinked again. My son's smile left his face and did not come back. He reached for the papers but stopped when my hand did not move away. "You did this without talking to us, Marpa?" he asked, like a child who just learned the cookie jar closes. "I did," I said. "It is my money. It is my house. It is my responsibility." He tried to pull calm over himself like a blanket that was too small. Jessica went straight for offense. "We told you this was urgent," she said. "We told you we had deadlines. We told you moving you to a safe place would protect you from being taken advantage of. I let that lie hang there. Then I looked at the chair in the hallway and said, 'Rose, would you come in now, please?' Mrs. Rose stepped into the room the way a neighbor enters a hospital room, with respect, with care. She wore her best church coat even though the day was warm. She nodded to me, then faced my children. "He is fine," she said in the voice that has calmed an entire block of arguments over the years. "He is steady. I see him every morning on his walk. I bring him the mail when the box is full. He cooks for himself. He pays his bills on time. He is not confused." She paused, looked at me, and put a folded paper by my plate. "He is grieving. That is different." Jessica opened her mouth, closed it. The clock ticked. The house breathed. My son tried for charm. "Mrs. Rose, with respect, this is a family matter." "It is a neighborhood matter, too," she said, and the kindness never left her voice. "Because what you do to him, we all feel. We all hear. I heard your voices in this house the night you thought the storm would cover the sound. I heard the argument. I heard things break." She nodded once and left the way she came, like a prayer. "Enough," Jessica said, pushing her binder a little too hard so the pens jumped. "We can't spend the afternoon on feelings. There are deadlines. We already have a buyer interested in the house, and the care facility has a private room available next week if we put down a deposit. It is a good deal, Richard." She used my name like a tool. I placed the second stack of papers on the table. The bank's letterhead looked beautiful under this much light. "A good deal for whom?" I asked. "Here is the attempted withdrawal from 2 days ago, $250,000. The name on the request was yours." I turned the page so the bold type faced them. "Rejected for irregularities." My son's chair creaked. Jessica's eyes flashed. "That is a—" She stopped. The lie didn't find a landing spot. She tried again. "We were moving things around to prepare. You asked us to help." "I asked you to visit your mother's grave," I said flatly. The house agreed in its quiet way. The clock kept time. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pipe clicked as the water heater woke and slept. Their folders began to look thin. The air began to feel different. I could taste the moment when someone realizes the floor is not where they left it. I reached for the third stack. This time I did clear my throat, not because my voice needed it, because the truth deserved the ceremony. "Here," I said, and I laid down the collection notices Harris had handed me. $247,000 in debt. In your name, Jessica. A web of it. Loans, cards, a lien. That is not my burden. That is your life, and it is why you are here, pushing numbers across my table like cooking oil on a hot pan. You plan to pay your fire with my house." Her hands, always moving, finally stopped. They found the edge of the table and held it like it could keep her from sliding. My son looked at her the way a man looks at a map and realizes the road he chose was never finished. "You told me you had it under control," he whispered, and the whisper was louder than any shout would have been. She found her voice. She pulled an old letter from her folder, the one she had waved in my living room days earlier. "Martha wanted us to be taken care of," she said, as if a sentence could become a shield if you say it with enough force. She wrote it down. She loved us. I looked at the empty chair to my right. I let my eyes rest there until the ache softened and turned into something firmer. "Martha loved truth," I said. "Truth first, then love. She made mistakes. So did I. So did you. But do not weaponize her kindness. Not in this house." The front door opened. Harris stepped in, suit neat, face calm, briefcase clicking like a metronome. Behind him, Officer Lane stood in uniform, cap in hand, another officer carrying a small sealed evidence bag. I did not announce them. I set out water glasses instead. Harris took the end of the table like a judge without a robe. "Afternoon," he said to everyone and to no one. "Let us get the facts aligned." He began not with thunder, but with the small stones that start a landslide. He confirmed the freeze. He read the bank protocols into the quiet. He opened his folder and placed a copy of the power of attorney and the updated directives where my children could see them. He spoke slowly, like teaching a class of students who had refused to do the reading. He told them what they could not do anymore. He told them what they had never been able to do. He told them what would happen if they tried again. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The house amplified him. Officer Lane cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to me, "we brought the item you requested us to return." He nodded to his partner, who set the small, clear bag on the table. Inside was a brown teddy bear, the left ear torn, a dark rust stain dried along the seam. Matthew's bear, the soft thing I bought my grandson on a trip to Minnesota, the one he used to tuck under his chin when he slept. I felt the heat rush to my face before I could stop it. My hands curled on the tabletop, and then flattened. I looked at my son. I looked at Jessica. I pointed to the bear without touching the bag. "You dragged this into your mess," I said, and my voice shook for the first time that day. "You dragged a child into your mess. You could not keep your hands off even the smallest, safest thing in this house." Jessica flinched like I had thrown the bag at her. She started to speak, stopped, started again. That is not what you think," she said, and the words fell apart in the air. "What is it then?" I asked quietly. "Because to me, it looks like you were ready to move everything out of here, right down to the last piece of a little boy's comfort, and the storm did not hide your tracks as well as you hoped." My son stood up so fast his chair tipped. He caught it before it hit the ground and set it back with trembling hands. "Enough," he said to Jessica, not to me. Then, to me, "Dad, you don't know how complicated this got. You're making it sound simple. It's not simple." "It is simple," I said. It is very simple. You thought grief made me blind. You thought love made me weak. You thought paper would make me forget what family means. Harris closed his folder and clasped his hands. The room gathered itself. The clock ticked. The house waited. "There's one more matter," he said, and slid a document across the table toward me. I did not have to read it. I had read it 3 times already in his office, and twice again this morning while the coffee brewed. But I lifted it anyway. Let the paper make that clean, certain sound as it bent. "This is an amendment to your estate," he said for the benefit of the room. "We prepared it in the aftermath of recent events. It designates a living trust for Matthew, with you as trustee and guardian. The house remains in your name for the rest of your life. Upon your death, the trust receives it, not any individual. No sale, no transfer before then, no care environment paid for with his roof." My son sat down hard. Jessica's eyes moved from Harris to me, to the empty chair on my right, as if Martha might still be sitting there and might save her with one soft word. That is the trouble with a conscience. It always shows up late to a bad party. "And now," Harris said, "the reason we did not start here, but must end here." He reached into his briefcase and produced the paper that had started my own awakening. He set the life insurance policy in the middle of the table like a stone in a pond. The ripples were immediate. Jessica leaned forward, breath hitching. My son's hand went to his mouth and fell again. $1.5 million, Harris said, the number clean as a bell, in the quiet room. "Beneficiary, Jessica Collins, executed 2 years ago." He let the words sit. Then he turned the second page. "However, the insurer accepted our filing this morning to investigate irregularities and undue influence. Until that is resolved, the payout is suspended. If the investigation confirms what we believe it will, the policy will be voided. If it is not voided, a court will decide whether the beneficiary designation stands. Either way, there is no cash for anyone today, or next week, or next month." Jessica's voice came out high and thin. "You can't do that," she said. "You can't just take away what was promised. Martha promised." "Martha promised love," I said. "Not loot." She pushed back from the table. The chair skidded. "I did what I had to do," she said. "I kept this family moving while you sat in this mausoleum of a house and did nothing. I am the one who took care of the arrangements. I am the one who called the lawyers and the bankers because you refused to make decisions." "You called them to take," I said, "and when arrangements did not go your way, you raised your voice. You broke things. You shook this house like it was a tree with fruit you felt owed." My son's face drained, then flushed. "You told me the money was yours," he said to Jessica. "You told me the policy was a gift Martha wanted to keep private because she didn't trust Dad's choices. You told me the debt was temporary. You told me—" "I told you what you could handle," she snapped. And there it was, the thin line that always appears when greed and fear pull in opposite directions. He recoiled like she had slapped him. She turned to me, trying one last tool. "Look at me, Richard. You know me. You know I wouldn't hurt Matthew. I wouldn't take his bear. That must have been a mistake in the move." Officer Lane lifted the little bag. The bear looked smaller in the harsh, clear plastic. "We found it in the bed of a rented truck parked 2 blocks east," he said. "Several items from this house were inside. The neighbor's camera caught the plate. We followed it." He set the bag down gently, as if it could bruise. "We are not here to make arrests today, but we are here to make sure this house is not emptied again without permission." Harris nodded once, as if a judge had just banged a gavel. He looked at me. I looked at the paper in my hand, the trust document with Matthew's name, sharp and true. I looked at the mortgage statement with the last payment circled, the same one Martha had danced around the kitchen with when we finally reached zero. I remembered the sound of her laugh that night. I remembered Matthew sleeping on the couch during Christmas, his socked feet sticking out from under a blanket, the bear tucked up under his chin. I remembered everything, and I knew what it meant to end this. I signed. My hand was steady. The pen glided. The room seemed to exhale with me. Harris countersigned. He slid the copy to me and tucked the original into his case. It made a deep, satisfying click when the latch closed. Jessica stared at the briefcase as if it were a safe that had just locked her out. "You can't do this to us," she said, and the last word sounded wrong even to her. Us. There was no us in what she had built, only her, layered in reasons. "You did this to yourself," I said. "When you treated my house like a bank, my grief like a window, my grandson's bear like cargo. When you treated Martha's kindness like a loophole. When you treated family like a word you could bend." My son put both hands on the table. He looked older. He looked younger. He looked lost. "What happens now?" he asked Harris, not me. "Now," Harris said, "we wait for the insurer. We file the necessary petitions. We enforce the freezes. We let the truth do its work." He stood, then remembered something, and set down a small envelope with my name in Martha's handwriting. My stomach pulled tight. He nodded toward it. "This was with the policy in the wooden box. You asked me to hold it until today." I took the envelope as if it might break. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet. A letter. The ink had faded a little, the way time melts sharp edges into kind ones. I read it silently, then read parts of it out loud, because the room needed to hear her voice, even if it came through mine. "If this reaches you, it means I didn't get to explain," Martha had written. "I wanted to help them stand on their own feet. I thought a policy might be a way to do it without you feeling like I had chosen one child over another. If I was wrong, if this brings you pain, I'm sorry. Use your judgment. You always had the better of it when I was too soft. Protect Matthew, keep the house warm, keep my chair by the window." I folded the letter and held it to my chest. For a moment, I let the ache wash over me. Not to drown, to clean, to leave me able to breathe. I looked at the empty chair and whispered, "I will." Jessica made a sound then, not a word, a sound like a rope pulled too tight. She reached for my son, but he pulled his arm away. "You told me," he said again, quieter, the words smaller now, but sharper. "You told me." The rift between them opened like a seam tearing. It was not loud. It was final. Harris gathered the papers. Officer Lane tipped his cap to me and spoke to the room. "This is done here today. If anyone tries to enter this property without permission, there will be consequences." He left with the bear still on the table in its little bag. A witness with button eyes. I would take it to Matthew myself later. I would wash it by hand, the way Martha used to fix small hurts. My son and Jessica stood in the doorway, looking at a house that was no longer willing to listen to them. My son finally spoke, not to me, but to the floor. "What do we do?" he asked. Jessica did not answer. For the first time since she met my family, she had nothing to say. They left without slamming the door. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was clean. It was mine. I walked back to the table and ran my hand across the wood. There were tiny grooves near the middle from years of forks and school projects and birthday candles tipped too far. I sat in my chair and looked at the chair to my right. The late light came through the window and landed on that cushion like a hand. I felt tired. Not the ache that beats you down. The kind that tells you the work was worth it. I poured water into the crystal glasses and drank slowly. The cool slid down my throat like a promise. The trust papers lay where Harris left them. The bank letters were stacked neatly. The policy sat under Martha's letter, as if even paper knew which page should be on top. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the sparrows in the maple out back, the soft, steady traffic on the street, where I have waved to neighbors for decades. My house sounded like itself again. I thought about tomorrow, about calling Matthew's school to set up a meeting. I'm asking my neighbor to help me bring in a new lamp for the living room, about cleaning the cushion on that empty chair, even though it did not need cleaning, about planting the bulbs Martha bought last fall and never got around to putting in the ground. I thought about making soup the way she did, with too many carrots, and saving some for Rose as a thank you. I thought about forgiving my son one day, not because he asked, but because I needed the space it would free inside my chest. Not today. One day. The phone buzzed on the sideboard. A text from Harris. 2 words. It's filed. That was the sound of a door locking behind the past. That was the sound of a window opening to the future. I set the phone down and let the clock tick. I was not waiting anymore. I was listening to the sound of a life that belonged to me. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. They will say the climax happened when I signed the papers, or when the bank letters hit the light like polished shields, or when the officer set the bear on the table and every excuse in the room fell silent. Maybe they are right. Maybe the climax was in their faces when they realized the money would not come, the house would not move, the old man would not fall. But for me, the turn had happened earlier, in the simple moment when I decided that love without truth is not love. That was when the ground tilted. That was when the game ended for them and began for me. If you are listening and you have been told you are small, if you have been told to sit in the corner while others divide your life, hear me. It hurts. Being dismissed by your own blood, it cuts where skin is thinnest. It steals your sleep. It makes your hands shake when you reach for your own keys. But it does not get to define you unless you hand it the pen. Do not hand the pen. Use your name. Use your voice. Use your table. And when it is time, sign. The sun slid lower and painted the wall the color of peaches. I let myself close my eyes for a minute. I could almost hear Martha in the kitchen, fussing with the kettle, even though I already had water. I could almost feel her fingers tap my shoulder the way she used to when I got lost in my head. I smiled without meaning to. I opened my eyes, stood up, and straightened the runner. The house waited. I walked to the door and locked it, not against the world, but in favor of a quiet evening. There will be a court date. There will be paperwork. There will be whispers on the block about what happened today. There will be a new way of speaking to my son that has space in it for both boundaries and hope. There will be mornings when the ache wins for a while. There will be afternoons when I catch myself setting the table for 2. And there will be nights when I sleep like a stone because I did what needed to be done. All of that is ahead. I am not afraid of it. For now, I wrote a single word on a sticky note and placed it under the magnet shaped like a cardinal on the refrigerator door. The word was small. It was enough. Tomorrow. And to you watching, to you listening, if you have ever been told your grief makes you weak, if you have ever been asked to sign yourself out of your own life, I see you. Feeling overlooked, feeling small in your own home, is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves respect, deserves to be recognized, comment 1 word: recognition. Now watch what happens when someone finally decides to change that. I woke the morning after that long night of papers and revelations with a silence I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't the heavy silence of grief or the hollow silence of betrayal. It was different, lighter. I opened the curtains in my bedroom, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a prisoner in my own home. I felt like a man who had chosen, who had fought, and who had won. The first thing I did was call Harris. His steady voice carried across the line. "It's done, Richard," he said. "The documents have been filed. The trust is sealed. They can't touch a cent without your hand on it." I closed my eyes and let the weight fall off my shoulders. My hand, the same one that once trembled at the thought of signing away my life, now rested firm on the table. "Thank you, Harry," I told him, "for giving me back more than my money, for giving me back my peace." Later that week, I signed the final agreement to sell off a portion of the company. Not all of it, just enough to ease the burden, to turn liquid the years of sweat and missed dinners and long nights I had poured into it. $700,000. That number wasn't just ink on paper. It was security. It was the sound of chains breaking. It was I who chose to live free instead of being tied to the memory of betrayal. Jessica and her husband didn't take it well. Word spread quickly around town. Small towns have long ears and sharp tongues. By the end of the month, they had moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. The same people who once smiled at them in church now looked away. Their invitations stopped. Their friends disappeared. Even the family kept their distance. They had bet everything on my silence, and when that failed, everything else crumbled. One afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. It was from Jessica. She wrote about regret, about being desperate, about making mistakes. She asked me for a chance to talk. She even underlined the words, "I'm sorry." I held that letter for a long time. Then I folded it back, slid it into the envelope, and set it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I whispered to the empty room. Too late. Forgiveness doesn't come from hearing sorry. Forgiveness comes from choosing not to let the anger live here anymore. I looked around my house then, the same house they had tried to steal. It was still mine. The walls, the windows, the porch where Martha once sat with her tea. It felt different now, not a cage, a sanctuary. I began planting again in the back garden, tomatoes, peppers, carrots. My grandson Matthew knelt in the dirt with me, his little hands patting down the soil around seedlings. He laughed when the hose splashed him. That laugh was worth more than any check I ever signed. We walked to the park every evening. He kicked his ball across the grass, and I chased after it slower than I once did, but with a lighter step. He started to smile again. For the first time since Martha's funeral, I heard his laugh ring without shadows behind it. Peace isn't just quiet. Peace is choosing how to spend your time. I joined a group at the community center, men and women my age, who met every Wednesday to play cards and share stories. I dusted off my old paints and easel, the ones I had stored in the attic decades ago when work and family took every hour of my day. I painted sunsets, trees, and the old wooden bridge at the edge of town. I let color return to my life, and I gave back. Well, with Harris's help, I put aside $50,000 into a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents to violence. I thought of Matthew, of the hollow space in his life where his grandmother used to be, and I knew no child should walk through that kind of shadow without help. Writing that check didn't feel like losing money. It felt like planting seeds that would bloom long after I was gone. Jessica and her husband struggled. I heard whispers of creditors, of calls from banks that went unanswered. They had no house to sell now, no company to dip into, no inheritance waiting like a safety net. They were forced to look at each other without the armor of money, and what they saw was not love, but blame. They tried to reach me again, through text, through my son. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but out of choice. My heart had healed too much to be pulled back into their storm. One evening I sat on the porch with Matthew. The sun painted the sky orange and pink, the kind of sky Martha always called a promise. He slipped his small hand into mine and said softly, "Grandpa, we're safe now." My throat tightened, but I smiled. "Yes, my boy, we finally are." That night I thought long and hard about what this journey had taught me. 3 truths stood out, clear as stars on a winter night. For us parents, love must come with boundaries. If we give without teaching respect, Our gifts turn into weapons in the wrong hands. For children, gratitude is not optional. It is the foundation of family. Greed doesn't just break trust, it devours everything it touches. Wow. And about people, about human nature in this modern world. I'd learned that money can buy houses, cars, and companies, but it cannot buy character. Character is the one inheritance no thief can steal. The following week, I was walking with Matthew in the park. He ran ahead to chase a kite that some other children were flying. A little girl, no older than 7, came up to me shyly and held out a daisy she had picked. "This is for you," she said, just like that. No reason, no expectation. I took it, thanked her, and watched her skip away. That tiny gesture from a stranger's child told me something simple but profound. The world still holds kindness. Even when family betrays you, even when life cuts deep, there are hands willing to offer flowers. I pressed that daisy into a book when I got home. I keep it on the shelf now, next to Martha's Bible, next to the letter she wrote me. It reminds me that stepping out of the circle of betrayal didn't just save me. It opened me to a wider circle of kindness, one I might have missed if I had stayed trapped in anger. So I say this to you, whoever is listening, whoever feels the sting of betrayal burning in your chest. Healing is possible. Boundaries are possible. Peace is possible. I don't need Jessica's apology. I don't need their approval. I have my grandson's laugh, my garden's soil, my community's warmth. I have myself. And that is enough. If you believe these lessons matter, if you see in my story something that speaks to your own life, then share it with me. Tell me what lesson struck you hardest. Was it that parents must love with limits? Was it that children must treasure gratitude above greed? Was it that character outlasts money in every measure that matters? Comment on the lesson that stays with you. I want to read each word you write because I know how powerful it is when truth is spoken out loud. And tomorrow I will plant more seeds with Matthew. We'll water the tomatoes. We'll watch the sky turn gold again. Each day will stand as proof that I chose right. Each day will remind me that freedom, respect, and truth are worth more than any inheritance could ever be. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.